The sun of Virex Primis did not rise. It simply intensified, burning above the core world's endless citadel like a white wound in the sky. The light touched nothing gently, scoured. At high orbit, ships the size of continents hung in tethered silence, their hulls plated in imperial alloys that shimmered like oil over water. Defense pylons tracked even the smallest movement. Entry corridors were magnetically regulated, DNA encoded. Access required layers of permissions that only a few dozen beings in the known galaxy held. The upper terraces of the imperial atrium shimmered beneath that terrible light, their edges razor-sharp against the void, casting monolithic shadows down the columnar depths of the ceremonial tiers. The atrium itself, built before the fall of the First Flame Epoch, had never been touched by war. Not a single kinetic strike or plasma round had scarred its structure. It was a sacred vessel of protocol. Here, war was declared but never fought. Caius Renner stood motionless at the threshold of Gate 22, the Diplomat's entry. No guards, no escort, just a path carved in graph-suspended obsidian, stretching across a yawning vertical canyon of watching eyes. The corridor extended half a kilometer into the atrium's heart, suspended without rail or support, its underside vanishing into mist and light refraction fields far below. The tiered balconies, each a kilometer wide, were packed with billions of silent observers, species drawn from every dominion of the Galactic Empire. They hung there, draped in ceremonial stillness, breathing recycled air through filtration crests, photonic membranes, and gill veils. Even the insectal castari, known for the buzz of their communal thought chatter, made no sound. The silence was not enforced. It was tradition. The ritual of war demanded it. Earth's only envoy walked alone. Each step forward set off minor fluctuations in the suspension field beneath his feet. It registered his mass, adjusted for gait. Renner ignored it. He walked at the same steady pace he'd kept through 37 years of service. He did not look up, did not wave. There would be no cheers. Earth was not loved here. At best, it was tolerated. At worst, it was forgotten. He moved beneath ancient hologlyphs projected across the walls, echoes of previous declarations, wars long since concluded, species gone without trace. Some of the glyphs flickered, corrupted by age or poorly translated, their meanings lost even to archivists. One displayed a human outline, faded, grainy, a footnote from Soul's own induction ceremony. Renner's face was carved from stillness. Slight jowls, gray at the temples, a faint scar across the upper lip, likely from a ceremonial duel in his earlier years, long before Earth's diplomatic corps banned such contests. His eyes, brown and unremarkable, bore the calm weight of someone who had outlived every war he was ever asked to endorse. Not a warrior, not a politician, just a man sent to read lines. And yet, as he neared the tribunal, something behind his expression shifted. Not a tremor, a narrowing. His fingertips flexed briefly at his side, then stilled. He remembered the look on his daughter's face the day the Empire sanctioned orbital cleanings over the Arcanid Weave. No declaration, no ritual, just a blank spot on the star map the next morning. At the far end, where the tribunal platform rose like a slanted obsidian fong, the executors waited. High Executor Varnix the Last stood at the center, flanked by two lesser adjudicators in bone-framed exocollars. Varnix's robes were sequenced with threads mined from collapsed singularities, shifting in color depending on the observer's genetic spectrum. His voice had leveled empires, passed genocidal decrees, elevated planets into compliance. In the shadowed upper gallery, Elian Sol leaned against the balustrade. He wore no title now, just a filament cloak from a ruined colony, its trim still crusted with desiccated pollen from extinct trees. His eyes, coated with ocular mesh, flicked between Renner and the ritualist drones. He had watched too many walk this bridge. None had ever turned the ritual back on its wielders. The ceremony was preordained. Humanity had been summoned not to debate, not to vote, but to agree. A token of collective will. A ceremonial brick laid in the edifice of extermination. Below Renner, far below the lowest visible tier, waited the species to be condemned, the Sarathi. 100 of them, gaunt-limbed and flesh-veiled, wrapped in containment shrouds. Their heads bowed, their movement minimal. They had already been tried. Now came the ritual. The Sarathi had once been a migratory species, biomechanically adapted to solar flares, thriving on plasma storms across dead stars. Their limbs extruded sheaths of living silica. Their thoughts resonated in low sonic pulses through vacuum-adapted organelles. Once they'd signed the 10th Accord. Once they had traded memory core encryption to the core-ward empires. Then they asked questions. Then they resisted shipment quotas. Now they would be erased. A child among them trembled. Her shroud had slipped slightly from one arm, revealing skin like translucent coral and eyes that flickered with internal light. She gripped the hand of the elder beside her. One last connection before silence. When Renner reached the platform's threshold, he paused. A silent acknowledgement to the chamber's breathless mass. No salute, no flourish, just stillness. The cameras aligned. Galactic broadcast systems synchronized. Light dimmed. Across 1,000 systems, sapients gathered in viewing halls, expecting the moment of compliance. In temples and war clinics, on mining rigs and Starliner lounges, the ritual was awaited with the reverence of religion. A declaration of war was the Empire's most sacred rite. It consecrated violence with order, wrapped annihilation in law. The executor's voice broke the silence. Caius Renner of Sol 3, Varnix rasped. His voice filtered through layers of harmonic translation. You are recognized. Speak the ritual words. Renner blinked slowly. The air smelled of iron and ancient stone. He stepped forward. No script was given. No cue card. The ritual was known by heart to every diplomat trained under the Empire. One line. One declaration. The name of the condemned, followed by the will of war. He looked up, eyes finally lifting to meet the trillion-fold gaze of the Empire, and said nothing. 3 seconds passed. Then 6. Varnix's mechanical I-word. Then Renner inhaled. His voice was not loud, but it carried with surgical precision. By Article 9 of the Varn Protocols, he said, I, acting on behalf of the sovereign peoples of Sol, hereby decline the designated war right. The words struck like kinetic fire. Not a denial, not a refusal, a declination within protocol, a hidden clause, a treaty segment so obscure it hadn't been cited in over 400 years, and never once on record during a war declaration. Murmurs erupted. Not from the crowd, they were bound to silence by oath, but from the transmission overlays, the administrative AIs, the backup feeds. Legal nodes stalled. An empire trained to execute routines hesitated. Renner stepped forward once more. By the same clause, Sol declares an independent audit of the legitimacy of this extermination decree. Under Clause Extension 14, we invoke separation of war powers, effective immediately. Chaos did not erupt. Not yet, but a tremor passed through the chamber, a ripple in data logic. Executor terminals began to reboot. Security uplinks flickered. The light dimmed another degree. High-orbit arrays reported unauthorized sync attempts. Deep system backups activated autonomously. 1,000 relay satellites blinked simultaneously and began transmitting something not in the Empire's registry. Renner stood unmoved. We acknowledge the breach. We assert the response. He stepped back, bowing once, shallowly. A diplomat's bow. Not defiance. Not submission. Protocol. Far below, one of the Sarathi looked up for the first time. High Executor Varnix did not speak. He couldn't. His data flow was locked in recursive cross-checking with the legal infonet. In the control towers of Core Command, emergency analysts began tracing linguistic patterns, searching for precedent. They found only redacted records from Sol's first admission hearings, sealed with burn keys no longer recognized by central authority. The atrium, ancient seat of judgment, had been used to initiate war. Not once had it seen someone use it to begin a different kind. And yet the human had not violated a single rule. From the edge of the gallery, Elian Sol straightened. His breath caught, not in fear, but in awe. Not a refusal, not rebellion, but the lighting of a fuse. Caius Renner turned and walked back across the bridge. Alone. Behind him, the Empire began to fracture. The silence that followed Renner's exit lingered like smoke in the lungs. Not absolute, not clean, just poisoned air that refused to clear. The Imperial atrium remained suspended in ceremonial pause, its ancient protocols unsure how to proceed. Even the atmospheric control arrays faltered, adjusting oxygen flow for beings who no longer knew if they were spectators or witnesses. High Executor Varnix the Last had not moved. His head remained slightly tilted, as if still parsing a transmission. A single thread of black ichor leaked from one nostril unnoticed. He was breathing through sealed mandibles now. Not for necessity, but control. Somewhere in the sublayers of his neurostack, biosecurity protocols had activated autonomously. Stress chem analyzers hissed in silence, regulating his pulse. The lesser adjudicators whispered furiously in their exocollars. Their voices did not carry beyond their circuit loops. But to Varnix, the sensory traffic was a needlestorm. Multiband panic. One repeated phrase, "There's no override." Below the dais, the Sarathi remained bound, but their posture had shifted. No longer bowed. Not resigned. The shrouded child, still clutching the elder's hand, watched the upper tiers with something between terror and disbelief. Her breathing had slowed. She watched the lights shift in the ceiling. One of the glyphs above had changed, once a banner of judgment, now streaming unrecognized characters. Something broke behind her eyes, not fear. Awareness. The kind that makes innocence obsolete. The Sarathi had never spoken of soul. Their oral traditions had no stories of earth. Their ancestors had never traded, warred, or allied with humans. And yet now their lives hinged on a declaration by a species they had no context for. No myth. No fear. No reverence. But now a tether. Something ancient and unspoken had just bent toward them. In the control arcologies that flanked the atrium's spire, administrative strata fell into recursive emergency states. Military overlays began requesting confirmation keys that no longer resolved. Command trees looped. Resource governors received diplomatic null routes from systems they didn't know existed. A dozen regional governors attempted overrides. None were accepted. All ended with a return phrase. / chain of custody reassigned. Earth Prime non-compliant / And in orbit human signals continued. It began subtly, shift patterns in the Imperial time wave. Clock drift. Then came signal rebroadcasts over Empire-owned comm grids, data packets encoded in Sol's archaic diplomatic cipher, impossible to translate in real time. These were not messages. They were assertions. Status pings. Legal declarations. Silent truths. Deep in the net-crypt vaults of the fourth moon, a logic engine stuttered. An internal failsafe activated and burned itself out in 2 seconds. The last message it processed read, / begin echo chain / directive, null accord / authorization, Renner level prime. No confirmation required. In the atrium, species began to stir. Not in rebellion, not yet, but uncertainty moved like static over skin. The Velidari uncoiled their viewing spines. The Braveld flickered their facial folds in erratic pulses. Even the Haraxi, whose ancestors had helped carve the Empire into being, began recalibrating their auditory lobes to record. Protocol was not failing. It was mutating. In the upper galleries, Elian Sol was already moving. He drifted between pillars, cloak-brushing old stone. A private relay whispered updates into his neural mesh. Not from the Empire, but from a shadow network built by survivors. He paused near the exit corridor where maintenance drones flickered in confusion, trying to reboot absent lighting. He had seen this before. The hollowing of Empire never began with rebellion. It started with misalignment. 2 clocks ticking out of sync. The center never noticed until it was too late. Sol felt a weight lift from history's throat. Not hope. Not yet. But something colder, clearer. He whispered into his mesh, transmitting a single phrase, phase change confirmed. Renner had not disappeared. He had returned to the diplomatic annex tower, flanked by no guards, greeted by no delegation. The corridors were empty. The structure had been intended for ceremonial usage only. No human had stayed here longer than 4 hours until now. The tower was ancient by Earth standards. 1,000 years old. It had been updated only once to install data compliance beacons and biometric filters. These were now dark, deactivated by remote seed code inserted hours ago. Within the tower, Renner passed beneath the banner of Sol, a sphere of deep black, haloed by 12 orbiting points, each one a dead relay lost during Earth's early expansion. The banner shimmered with passive heat signature, the only warmth in a structure otherwise kept to archival temperatures. He entered the central chamber and closed the doors behind him. The walls were bare save for a single relic, a shard of the first charter, sealed in glass, its language dead even to Earth's linguists. Beside it, an inscription only visible under UV. All power exists in the absence of permission. The room was quiet. But the quiet did not last. One by one, hollow terminals activated. Silent greetings blinked in every language. Not from Earth. Not from allies. From species unacknowledged, unsheltered, and unseen. Each bore the same insignia, the mark of Article 9. Not forgotten. Buried. The screen count climbed, 15, 40, 72. The room became a constellation of the erased. Caius Renner removed his jacket, folded it, Saturday, and began to speak, not to the Empire, but to those still listening. He spoke of thresholds, of legality as weapon, of silence as sovereignty. He spoke of Earth's first years in galactic presence, not as actors, but as archivists. He recalled the Agar disputes, the Deneb trials, the annexation of the Weave. He spoke names not heard in centuries. He quoted broken treaties verbatim. He did not look at the camera. He did not raise his voice. And across subspace echo nodes, his words began to duplicate. On one drowned world in the Tesh Chordal Reach, a message appeared inside a sealed temple that no longer registered to any cartographic archive. The survivors there read it. A grandmother whispered Renner's name to her infant for the first time. In the chamber above, Varnix finally moved. The ichor had congealed along his jaw. He turned to his adjudicators and spoke one word. Burn. It activated instantly. Buried beneath the atrium, power matrices spun up. Flamefall protocols. Not metaphorical. Literal. The ceremony of ashes, the Empire's oldest rite of annihilation. Originally used for quarantining rogue AIs during the singularity schisms, it had been repurposed for organics. An entire species could be reduced to isotopic dust in under a minute. In the Sarathi platform, the containment shrouds began to hum. Their outer membranes fluoresced blue, indicating detachment phase. The elders shifted, shielding the young. They made no sound. They knew their ending. Below the platform, deep fusion vents opened. They released no heat. Only void pressure, the antithesis of breath. One by one, the glyphs above the atrium changed to red. Then everything stopped. Every vent closed. Every emitter powered down. Every command tree collapsed. And in its place, a new protocol appeared. / Sol authority intercession, command freeze validated / Silence, then light. The atrium lights surged white, then stabilized. The executors froze. The shrouds dimmed to gray. A haze fell across the room, a weightless hush. In orbit, the first of Earth's ghost satellites decloaked. They bore no weapons. Only mirrors. Constructed from adaptive obsidian foil and coated in programmable reflection strata, they captured and redirected light, heat, and signal. They showed not what they were, but what was watching. They reflected. And on every reflective surface in the atrium, on the ceremonial shields, the floor tiles, the transparent gallery domes, a face appeared. Caius Renner, seated, staring straight ahead. Not addressing the Empire. Not asking permission. Simply watching. Below, the child Sarathi wept silently. Her elder did not comfort her. He stared upward, no longer afraid. The child clutched the shroud tighter, as if memory could be preserved through pressure. The Empire, for the first time in its recorded history, had lit the ash fires of judgment and been denied. And in that denial, something more terrifying bloomed. Precedent. In the orbital shadow beyond the light of Virex Premies, the rest of Earth's silent fleet began to wake. Not in readiness for war, but in expectation of judgment. Protocols waited. Eyes opened. The galaxy turned. The Empire's response came not in fire, but in absence. Across the high-orbit command webs of the inner systems, fleet relays blinked out one by one. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply disconnected. Their signals softened to nothing, like the breath of a dream exhaled through steel, as if Earth's re-entry into the galactic center had inverted the meaning of signal itself. Encryption trees unraveled in real time. Data seeds burst and scattered like windshed pollen. Redundant cores fell into endless checksum loops, unable to verify their own origins. The Empire's eyes began to close, one lid at a time. Zarvel 80 was the first to go. A strategic analytics vessel stationed at the edge of the atrium's deep watch curtain. It was staffed by 4,000 precog strategists and 4 apex-grade thoughtcrafters. Its final transmission was a rotating cycle of long-dead Earth dialects. Yoruba, Nahuatl, Old English, looped through a child's lullaby. The melody held no modulation cues, no pulse encryption. It was a ghost in verse, unclaimed by machine or memory. No known AI issued it. No crew remained aboard. Then the second wave began. On Alvin Reach, a refueling station failed to respond to its scheduled supply ping. Imperial Logistics flagged it as minor priority. When the inspection drone arrived 3 hours later, it found every internal system fully powered and functional, every light cycling in gentle, familiar intervals. The air remained fresh. Reactor cores hummed at perfect equilibrium. But the station was empty. Food was still warm. Doors were ajar. Footsteps marked the floor in various directions, none leading outward. Surveillance footage revealed nothing beyond looped, static-framed corridors. Later, upon decompiling the local AI memory core, the inspectors found a single fragment. A voice, barely audible. They remembered us. Then, nothing. And then the ghosted worlds. Entire listening posts, those that had watched the rimward flow since the age of binding, ceased reporting. Silent. Their archives remained untouched, their power cells intact. Defense grids remained online. But the interpreters, the watchers, the linguists, all were gone. Some facilities had fresh coffee still venting steam. Others were found mid-broadcast, with open transmission codes pointing toward Seoul, as if awaiting a return call. The stations themselves were untouched. And in a move far more disturbing to the Empire's architects, the logs from those posts contained no entries referencing Seoul prior to Renner's declaration. Earth had become a negative space in time. No ships, no bombs, no declarations, just an increasing erosion of imperial certainty. From Virex Premies to the border worlds, analysts and code historians struggled to name what they faced. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't war. There was no threat to record. It was presence shaped like absence. In the Imperial Senate chambers, a marble-tiered hemisphere that once hosted voices now long silenced, an emergency quorum was called. Factions emerged from cryorotation. Ancient political lines reactivated, many unsure whether they still held relevance. Panic wore new robes, urgency couched in ceremonial tones. They've poisoned our infrastructure, some argued. They've seized the comm routes, others hissed. But no footage showed aggression. No anomalies breached security perimeters. Earth had not moved. The executors did not attend. Varnix did not answer summons. He had entered containment. Sealed inside a cerebral resonance vault, shielded from all signal ingress, he was surrounded by analog walls a meter thick, designed for spiritual decompression, not war. In the core intelligence spires of the throne orbitals, data scribes pored over the moment of fracture. They watched Renner's stillness on thousands of screens. They looped the mirror reflections frame by frame. They deconstructed his phrase, command freeze validated, as if it were an equation. But nothing followed. And yet, 1,000 legal channels now treated the phrase as binding. System governors attempting to override it received only one return packet. // you were seen. // No origin traceable. No relay pattern. Not from Earth, perhaps not even from Seoul. Some speculated the message was residual, left behind like scent. 3 scout ships deployed from the neighboring Carrax chain were halted en route, not by interceptors, but by navigational recursion. Their course plotters encountered field variances that didn't match any known mass. Virtual gravity wells appeared in non-gravitic zones. Celestial anchors drifted just enough to trigger failsafe withdrawal. Each time they recharted, the result changed. The fleet AI on one vessel began to whisper. Not alarm, not sabotage. It offered the crew alternate destinations. Star systems not on any record, described only in metaphor. Where the long sun rests. Where memory is weight. Where the child still waits in dust. The captain of that ship resigned upon return. The crew was uninjured, but spoke in dream cadence for a week. Back in the diplomatic annex tower, Renner had not moved. He remained seated, but beneath his stillness, a slow contraction played behind his eyes. He felt the unfolding, not as triumph, but as inevitability. These were old levers being pulled, buried triggers tripped. He had always known Earth would not be left untouched forever. He had simply chosen the moment. The Article 9 terminal bloomed with unreadable signals. Some came in waveforms that pulsed across retinal nerves. Some were made of scent and enzyme patterns. One was simply a sudden heat in the room, intense, brief, gone. Each message was archived. Each one was read. Outside, Earth's orbital layer thickened. The satellites did not launch. They arrived, from slip folds buried in system shadow, unfurled from inert shells that had floated as debris for centuries. Created under old soul treaties, they were sleeper architectures, civilian-grade optics embedded with sovereignty flags, primed to reflect rather than transmit. They emerged, polished black and obsidian trimmed, with faces that did not record or broadcast, but reflected. One passed directly over Executor Varnix's private retreat. Its surface shimmered, and instead of his own face, Varnix saw the remnants of a world he had destroyed. Polaris 6. The image was from ground level. Volcanic sand, a child's foot, small bone charms tangled in soot. The details were surgical, timeless. The mirror held the image for 63 seconds. Varnix collapsed. He did not cry from guilt. He cried from memory, because the child had once looked at him long ago before the purge. This was not rebellion. This was accounting. Elsewhere, on Hesker's Fall, a decommissioned mining world once stripped for neutron or an old signal relay activated. The facility had been non-functional for a century, buried beneath irradiated ice. Yet the pulse was unmistakable. / Earth remembers. / No callback channel. No carrier ID. Just the phrase. It echoed across deep band channels, where no voice had traveled in generations. Then came the resignations. Imperial envoys began stepping down. Not in protest. Not in defection. In recognition. Their departures were not broadcast electronically. They were hand-delivered, a mode of communication and used since the Second Ascension era. Across 47 systems, messengers appeared without escort, without weapons, wearing the insignia of null states, sovereign individuals representing only silence. They delivered sealed documents, encoded in materials too ancient for AI parsing. Bark paper, etched bone, pressure-scored metal. Then they left, often disappearing into untracked passageways, or simply never seen again. And each document bore the same closing mark. A black sphere, 12 orbitals, the banner of soul. In the Braveled commune, which had not declared political allegiance since the Pale Accord, a response was issued to the Empire. It was not a statement, nor a formal withdrawal. Just a syllable carefully crafted. Observed. For the Braveled, whose culture revolved around collective memory through observation, the act of seeing was spiritual law. To observe was to preserve. To stop watching was to release the watched from relevance. Then the planet shuttered its exoatmosphere. The orbital mirrors inverted. All data flow ceased. Light no longer reflected from its surface. The Braveled had not declared neutrality. They had chosen to erase the Empire from their sight. The Empire, despite its fleets, its executors, its centuries of dominance, had no answer. It had been seen, and found wanting. Across the outer systems, species that had once survived only by silence began to stir. Some sang names not spoken in millennia. Others knelt beside shrines etched with the Article 9 glyph. A few began whispering to their young the story of the man who watched, but never spoke a threat. Renner's image persisted, not as message, as mirror. The silence that followed did not shrink. It expanded, not because Earth had declared war, but because at last the galaxy began to listen. The first true inversion did not occur in orbit nor on a throne world, but in a warehouse on Galrec 4. It was an old loading bay, long automated, where freight drones once offloaded memory gel containers used in legal archiving. The walls bore rust patterns where data conduits had corroded. Light flickered with the erratic heartbeat of neglected power grids. For over a century, it had processed nothing. And then, at 2:14 planetary local, it received a shipment without origin. The drones emerged from stasis, recalibrated after decades, and moved to unload the crate. Inside was no data, no code, just an object, a single polished obsidian disk, 12 indentations spaced evenly along its rim. Beneath it, a folded cloth marked with a black sphere, the symbol of soul. The warehouse's internal system, built to log archival transfers, recorded the object's presence. It flagged the entry under unrecoverable treaty authority. Then it shut itself down. Permanently. No tampering. No breach. Just the completion of an unseen protocol. By morning, the warehouse was surrounded by off-world media, 2 planetary militia teams, and a sub-administrative envoy from the Imperial Archive Corps. None could explain how the disk had arrived. No ship was tracked. No gate was used. No signal anticipated it. And yet it had been received, logged, and accepted by the system as valid. More disks followed. Not thousands. Dozens. Enough to seed fear, not familiarity. They appeared in law courts, meditation halls, mineral refineries, academic observatories. Always alone. Never guarded. No message. No violence. Just the emblem. Just the presence. On Ivros K, a planet governed entirely by algorithmic law, a disk was found in the core logic chamber. The governing intelligence IGEV-33A attempted to interface. It failed. Then it restructured its internal logic tree to accommodate the presence. It failed again. 3 seconds later, IGEV-33A initiated self-collapse. Its final log simply read: Authority unknown. Override impossible. The planet shut down for 12 days. Its society, engineered for dependency, reverted to manual systems. In the vacuum, new debates began. Who was watching? Who had always been watching? The Empire labeled it disruption, dissent, terrorism in ceremonial form. They tried to seize the disks, tried to contain their spread. Imperial engineers attempted to scan, replicate, disassemble. But each object, when analyzed, revealed no construction seams, no components. They were not machines. They were context. And context was shifting. The Empire had always assumed that its threats were unidirectional, that violence flowed outward from the core, legitimized by history and scale. Earth, no longer a silence, now a presence, was not acting through rebellion. It was not trying to win a war. It was rewriting what war meant. The inversion was not strategic. It was epistemic. In the throne orbitals, high above Virex Premies, the imperial voice, once a ceremonial figurehead relegated to ritual speech, issued a formal declaration. The address was meant to unify, to condemn Earth to project continuity. It had been meticulously crafted by 12 language artisans and 5 predictive dialectic AIs. 8 minutes long. A spiral-structured call to loyalty. But the moment it began, every broadcast was silently overlaid by an image, Caius Renner's face. Still seated. Still watching. No message accompanied the image. No signal suppression occurred. The voice's lips moved. His gestures followed script. The data was preserved, archived, reviewed by compliance officers. But no one heard it. Across the Empire's heartworlds, the words fell into stillness. No vibration reached the audiences. The transmission was unbroken, and yet nothing emerged. No sound. No emotion. Just image. Not censorship. Not jamming. It was structural disconnection. A reframing of the signal itself. The Empire spoke, but the galaxy no longer recognized it as valid input. Renner remained silent but not passive. Within the diplomatic annex tower, monitors continued to broadcast his unmoving image. In the shadows of his eyes, analysts swore they could see minute shifts, tiny variations in breath and gaze that mapped precisely to each incoming reaction. He was calibrating, not waiting. Holding judgment not as a threat but as a ledger. At the edge of the hollow verge, a thoughtseer named Tashivkor, last philosopher of the extinct chronery, recorded his interpretation. In the final page of his notes, found after his voluntary cessation, he wrote, "The center has lost the right to define. The emitter is now the noise." In the nightside shadow of Virex Premies, Earth satellites began transmitting for the first time. Not words. Not images. Just time. A synchronized pulse. Across all receivers, regardless of encryption or protocol, one timestamp repeated. 1 hour. Then it began to count down. No context. No threat. Just a clock. 60 hours. The meaning of the timer became the gravitational center of every high-level briefing. Theories multiplied like parasites. Some believed it marked the activation of Sol's fleet and invisible armada awakening. Others whispered it signified a legal event, a transition of jurisdiction, a tribunal clause invoked beyond imperial law. One sect of Haraxi monks, keepers of the karmic mirrors, claimed it was the moment galactic balance would correct and memory would weigh heavier than might. On the frontier world of Nelsidra, a tri-species council convened in emergency quorum. The representatives argued in 3 languages overlapping like chords. The youngest among them, a 4th-cycle agronomist, said nothing. Instead, they set a timer to match Earth's clock and lowered their system's defenses. If this is judgment, they said, we are willing to be seen. The others followed. But the truth was simpler. And more dangerous. The countdown was not a trigger. It was a lens. Everything that occurred during its passage would be observed, recorded, and bound to precedent. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Legally. The invocation of Article 9 had transformed all responses into public record, into jurisprudence. The Empire's actions were no longer declarations. They were case law for a galaxy no longer under its control. The first executor to understand this was Torvel Invokes, commander of the 5th Convergence Fleet. He did not panic. He simply read the layers, parsed the signal, and then stood in silence for 8 full minutes. He removed his epaulets, left his command bridge, and boarded a shuttle. He exited his dreadnought into low orbit above Genhaller, the decommissioned library world. There, in open space, he opened a comm line to no one and said, "We were never the authors. Only the editors." Then he powered down all remaining systems and drifted. He was later recovered by local medics and treated for dehydration. He spoke only once more before refusing all contact. History has reverted to its source. Within 2 hours, the 5th Convergence Fleet shut down. Entirely. No shots fired. No sabotage. Just a long, slow dimming. The countdown continued. Every second was a wait. Every response a submission. And still, Renner did not speak. He did not need to. Because Earth had not given the galaxy an ultimatum. It had given it a mirror. And the inversion was complete. High Executor Varnix the Last had not left the subthrone containment chamber in 22 hours. The walls, once polished with obsidian glyphs, were now dulled by condensation, the symbols weeping into shadow. The signal seals still held, but their coroni pulsed with irregular flicker. The air filtration system hummed louder with each hour, laboring to scrub the breath of a man who had become something other than imperial, no longer sovereign, but simply present. The chamber sat beneath the throne orbitals, a fortress within the void where once law had been declared with clarity and finality. Now it echoed with the sounds of a collapsing lexicon. Outside, lights dimmed across long corridors. Bulkhead servos cycled sluggishly. Even the automated hymn speakers embedded in the walls repeated themselves out of sequence, ancient praises looped into nonsense. Varnix had ceased speaking aloud. Not in vow, but necessity. Every word spoken in recent days had returned to him mangled. Orders misinterpreted. Commands denied. Even his private scribes, grown in biomechanical wombs to transcribe without error, had ceased writing. Pens dropped. Eyes blinked. They asked him again and again what he meant by what he said. He had no answer. A single terminal sat before him, archaic in its design, stripped of all predictive assistance. Direct transmission only. No intermediaries. No relays. What it broadcast would reach every surviving Imperial node, unfiltered and uncurated. It was a sovereign line. The final one. He stared at its blank surface. The reflection was imperfect, distorted by curvature. His face looked older than it had ever been. Not aged by time, but hollowed by the absence of certainty. Beyond the chamber, the Empire was in freefall. Subsector command had fractured. Executor Primarchs no longer issued orders. Half had resigned, citing obscure charter codes. A quarter had vanished entirely, no trace, no record, as if returning to dust. The remaining few issued contradictory edicts, invoking decades-old authorities long dissolved by precedent. Fleet command stuttered. Enforcement Corps argued jurisdiction with food logistics. The Galactic Corps, once synchronized to the heartbeat of 1,000 systems, had become a muttering Tower of Babel. And across every display, every surface polished enough to reflect, Renner remained. Still seated. Still watching. The timer continued. 35 minutes and 26 seconds. Varnix inhaled. Not deeply. Not deliberately. A breath filtered by instinct, by dread transmuted into biology. His bones ached. His implants vibrated out of sync. His vision pulsed when he blinked. The mirror logic Earth had cast was no longer metaphor. It was rhythm. He keyed the terminal. No access passphrase. No clearance level. No encryption. Just voice. He waited for the silence to finish listening. Then he began. By declaration of core authority, I address all domains still under the structure of imperial law. I speak not as executor, not as the last, but as a man burdened by empire. His voice rasped like dust through broken gears. We were not built to last. We were built to endure. That was our mistake. We mistook persistence for design. We mistook silence for consent. We mistook law for truth. He paused. The transmission light did not blink. There were no signs of life in the receiver, yet he knew, by the absence of resistance, that it had been heard. We believed the galaxy would never stop listening. That history would always bend toward our names. But history, I now understand, does not bend. It breaks. And when it does, the noise is not what shatters you. It's the echo. His hands trembled once, then stilled. In a comm node 3 sectors distant, a rogue protocol seeded centuries ago by Earth reactivated. It verified Varnix's voice print, archived it, and silently began distributing translated transcripts. On the outer rim of known space, a colony of transcription dreamers awakened. They began carving his words into amberstone. I do not beg forgiveness. I do not defend action. I will not recite treaties. I will not quote numbers. I speak only this. We saw them. We knew what was done. And we chose forgetfulness. We built a forgetting so vast we believed it permanent. But memory is recursive. And Earth remembered. Across the Empire, light dimmed. Screens faded to black. The timer paused. 33 minutes and 33 seconds. Then resumed. 33 minutes and 32 seconds. In planetary courtrooms and orbital academies where students had once studied Empire law as the only true canon, now they stood in silence. 1,000 instructors no longer spoke. Some had turned to the walls. Some watched the clock. Others stared into nothing as if the transmission had spoken a truth too large to house in language. On Kethlor Station, once a hub for disinformation and memory redaction, a silence fell so deep that even the light dimmed. A junior archivist deactivated the memory scrub engines. When her superior demanded explanation, she simply said, "There's no longer a future worth erasing." Varnix stared at his own reflection in the terminal's gloss. The lines beneath his eyes were no longer fatigue. They were weight. His spine curled as if the atmosphere had thickened. He felt the collapse of mass not around him, but within. I do not absolve them. Earth is not innocence. Earth is not savior. But they were quiet. And we called them small. And they built a silence so complete we did not see what lived inside it. They gave us a mirror. And we filled it. There was no response. Not one light blinked. But across 5,000 relay systems, the message seeded itself into the unchangeable vault of precedent codex. It became law. Not by vote, by being heard. On the world of Sinjo, a minor agricultural satellite, a grandmother paused in feeding her skybeasts and whispered, "He finally said it." In the floating city of Marisral, a council of judges broke rank and returned their robes to the sea. And in the minds of 1,000,000 archivists, one truth coalesced, that the end of a broadcast is not silence, it is the last word someone is willing to live with. In the annex tower, Renner blinked once. Varnix reached forward, pressed a single key. The transmission ended. He did not leave the chamber. He did not need to. Outside, the Empire fell into a hush so wide it could only be measured by what had stopped trying to be said. And beyond it, Earth continued to listen. The countdown reached its midpoint. 30 minutes. No bells. No light. No change. And yet everywhere, something opened. In the deep glacial ravines of Hellion Fold, where light touched ice a century late, an old relay station pulsed alive. Buried beneath 60 meters of frost and regret, its beacon activated with no signal from above. The relay had not been touched since the first protocol wars. It was believed entombed, its logic drives too primitive to survive synaptic age rot. It sent one packet. Directive Retrieval, Article 9 Subsection M, Memory Inheritance. In a control nexus buried beneath Virex Premies, Imperial technicians watched the packet transmission trace. No threat signature. No hostile trace path. They logged the event, marked it low priority, then went still. Across 600 worlds, similar pulses followed. They came not from war centers, not from fleets or fortresses, but from places where silence had once been imposed by structure. From old libraries sealed before they could finish their index. From temple vaults where record was sacrilege. From terraforming caches on worlds abandoned mid-seed. From monastic orbitals where knowledge was stored in soundless drones forbidden from playback. Each signal was small, not encrypted, not urgent, Just precise. Memory had been called, and it responded. On the archivist moon of Direxisfen, a structure long mistaken for geological anomaly cracked open for the first time in 3,000 years. It groaned with tectonic reluctance, shedding eons of mineral armor. Beneath it, coiled in a helix of crystal data filaments, lay a truth Earth had encoded during its first entry into the Empire's margins, a complete, unredacted, multi-species ledger of historical crimes compiled, translated, timestamped, and formatted in accordance with the Empire's own jurisprudence standards. No defenses activated. No notification sent. It simply opened. There were no commentaries. No judgments. Just record. The opening of memory had begun. In the vast courtship chambers of the Araxial assemblies, where speech is sent and rulings are carved in molted shell, the archivists wept openly. Their tears took form as volatile pheromone clouds, encoding trauma through shared exposure. Not grief. Recognition. Their truths had not been forgotten. They had simply been delayed. Some of them fell to the floor, not in collapse but in reverence. They began carving new shells with names once declared heretical. In a submerged city on the waterworld Nialacor, elder choristers who had survived 6 cycles of silence began to sing again. Their songs were not hymns. They were depositions, each note a citation, each chorus a case. The sound entered the deep-sea archive caverns where acoustic vibration encoded into pressure walls. Forgotten incidents rippled back into presence. The city pulsed with resonance. Fish rose to the surface. Old machines blinked awake, recognizing tone patterns burned into their structure. On Threltson 9, a species without written word but infinite memory began to broadcast images through their skin. Full-body bioluminescent record. They showed the deaths of unacknowledged famines. They showed the moment imperial language was first forced upon them, each term a cut. For 3 days, they walked naked through their cities, luminous with restored pain. Children followed them. Not to mourn, but to learn. At dusk, the children began to glow too. In the ice-laced forests of Maverne Reach, a culture believed extinct reappeared. Not as warriors, but as witnesses. They emerged from cryogenic roots planted into orbital wreckage centuries ago. When asked why they had returned, their matriarch simply answered, "Because the world we remembered is being remembered again." A single leaf fluttered from her coat. It contained a map. It led nowhere imperial. And on the abandoned reclamation ring of Trine Ossa, once a penal archive for corrupted biological narratives, the last surviving record-keeper, blind and centuries old, opened a sealed capsule that whispered one phrase into the stagnant air. Testimony reinstated. In the core registry of the Empire's legal AI strata, a single anomaly lit red. Not corruption. Not breach. But precedent. Renner did not speak. But he moved. He rose from his chair in the annex tower for the first time in 70 hours. His legs trembled slightly. Not from weakness. From anchoring. He walked to the window, placed one hand on the glass, and looked out, not at the stars, not at the Empire's dying glow, but at the small black satellite floating just beyond the tower's shielding. It turned to face him. Not in communication. In acknowledgement. In the reflection, his face blurred, overlaid by a younger version of himself. Eyes clearer. Posture heavier. A single breath escaped him. He nodded once. In that moment, 22 ancient satellites, long dormant, changed orbit. Each aligned to focus a beam not inward, but outward, beyond the edge of known space. There was no message content. Just light. Just confirmation. Below, in the silent floors of the tower, the oldest relay activated. A thin beam of pre-light spectrum pierced into deep void. It didn't aim for the Empire. It aimed for those who had never been part of it. And they answered. In the tenebrae expanse, on an uncharted world layered with bones of abandoned expeditions, an unnamed species moved. Long regarded as myth entities who spoke in magnetism visible only through interference patterns, they surfaced across several planetary data feeds, distorting imperial frequencies with wordless resonance. They did not broadcast. They echoed. In response, an ancient orbital artifice shattered itself, revealing not weapons, but a vault of translations Earth had prepared for first contact. The last line of the document read, "What was denied voice will now be granted pattern." Earth had not asked permission. It had prepared to remember. And now memory was planetary. Across half the galaxy, the weight of history was no longer buried. It moved like weather, settling into lungs, pressing into code, flashing across sky. A merchant pilot above Aldrex, V7 whispered to no one, "It feels heavier now. Like the air remembers me." Judges on Kaltorim began writing sentences backward from effect to cause. Priests on the bridge world of Velha sat in total silence, listening for voices they had once been trained to forget. In drift colonies once deemed culturally inadmissible, children who had never learned to write began drawing the symbols of forbidden archives perfectly, line by line. Some of them cried while they drew. Memory had returned. But more than memory, order. For centuries, the Empire had built the illusion that records without courts were just stories. That proof without permission was just debris. Earth had inverted that. It had made the record the court. And as the countdown continued, its tone changed. 27 minutes and 59 seconds. Not just a clock. A trial. The opening of memory was not the end of the Empire. It was its submission. And across every forgotten system, the judgment had already begun. The countdown neared its final day. 24 minutes. Waypoint was never listed on Imperial charts. It did not exist within the official star maps distributed to fleet navigators or traders. It hovered in the spaces between sanctioned lanes, a false coordinate tethered to a dying dwarf star, forgotten in all but function. No empire had ever planted a flag there. No monument marked its silence. And yet it endured. The facility had once been designated Vale Point Custodial Observatory, approved during the reign of Executor Galen IV under a clause for stellar anomaly monitoring. A minor line item. A shielded vote. In truth, it was the Empire's memory crypt. The custodial station had become a containment nexus. It housed not prisoners, not weapons, but something far more dangerous to an empire built on forgetfulness, truth. Data fragments. Sensory archives. Testimonies that could not be purged because their erasure would rupture treaty timelines. Proof too dangerous to deny, yet too damning to reveal. The Waypoint Array held the crimes that had no resolution, only delay. It had no guards. No beacon. Just self-maintaining machines, old, intelligent, loyal only to protocol. Their minds were low-frequency lattices, incapable of ideology. They understood only state, but even they had begun to feel the distortion. When the memory pulses swept the outer systems, Waypoint did not resist. It listened. Its outer shell rotated for the first time in 912 years. The upper spires realigned with galactic north. Power conduits flared along spinal joints. Internal heat nodes pulsed to life, reawakening thought cogitators that had dreamed in static. Then came the release. 23 containment silos opened in sequence. A hiss, a click, a mechanical exhale. From each emerged a chain of mimetic constructs, no text, no code, just encrypted experience. Smells. Footsteps. Cries in forgotten dialects. Tactile sensations from the hands of the starved. Flashburn memories of impact and refusal. These were not just data packets. They were fragments of pain, deliberately preserved. They rose like breath into the dark. Then the tower opened. A single corridor extended outward into space, its structure laced with anti-radiant plating and glimmer silk threading. It was not a gangway. It was a bridge not for ships but for presence. From its center, a platform unfolded like a waiting palm. It did not activate propulsion. It did not emit a call. It simply ignited an old beacon. / Article 9 Tribunal Anchor initiated / The signal was pre-imperial. The language archaic. But its intent was clear. It was time to judge. Earth responded. Not from Earth itself, but from its farthest archives, Sol's deep array. 12 signals flared across the galactic net. Each bore the encrypted seal of a distinct Article 9 delegation, 12 species who had once been denied justice. None of them bore Sol's voice directly. Earth had not made itself judge. It had prepared others. The delegates. They came. Not human. Not imperial. One by one, they arrived in vessels unlike anything the Empire's navy could parse. The Araxial ship arrived first, a vast, curling chrysalis whose hull exhaled memory-scent clouds. Each burst of vapor encoded judicial expression through pheromone sequence. As it drifted into Vale Point orbit, Imperial listening posts received only one reading, recognition. Next came the Threltson Arc. It gleamed with living bioluminescence. Its panels pulsed with testimony, entire stories etched in real time across the hull. Witnesses glowed along the spines of the ship, documenting the passage. The Mavern arrival rooted itself into vacuum. It did not land. Its limbs extended into the dark, exuding spore filaments that flickered with layered chronologies. In Mavern culture, memory was sacred only when shared with unbroken space. Others followed. A ship woven from bone and polymer arrived on silent tethers carrying the last 2 seers of the extinct Invidra. A hollow star frame drifted in behind it, its surface covered in dust. Inside, it played back the cries of every refugee never recorded. And then, at last, Earth's ship. Small. Silent. Blacker than vacuum. Its surface absorbed light. No insignia. No flare. It moved as if it had always been there. It did not land. It opened. Within it, a single chamber. No console. No pilot. A table old and worn. 12 seats equidistant. In the center, a mirror. Oval. Perfect. The delegates disembarked in silence. They did not speak. They did not bow. They entered the chamber each to their seat. As they moved, the space filled with presence, the Araxials sent trails lingering along the walls like incense, the soft shimmer of Threltsan light reflecting in the mirror's frame, the Mavern spores dancing in the air like pollen made of time. When the final figure settled, the tribunal anchor completed activation. Veil Point's internal chambers realigned. The central core unfurled, revealing data petals, each layer etched with time-locked sensory archives. The mirror received them. Then began playback. It did not show words. It showed events. Genocides coded as population reassignment. Cultural erasure performed as language integration. War campaigns justified by economic uplift. Treaties signed and shredded in the same breath. Screams. Voices. Silence imposed. Not narrated. Just shown. The delegates watched. They did not blink. They did not flinch. In their cultures, verdict was not delivered through rebuttal or testimony. Verdict was recognized. Outside, in nearby sectors, imperial signals flared. Naval formations clustered on long-range scans. One command flagship transmitted a high-priority override ping. Order, enact Class A nullification. Veil Point did not reply. The tribunal could not be interrupted. Because what was happening was not a broadcast. It was binding law. The playback reached its end. In the final image, not a death. Not a ruin. Just a flag. Black. A sphere. 12 orbiting points. Soul. Then the mirror dimmed. And one by one, the delegates stood. They walked in a circle, pausing before the mirror. Each touched it once. No ceremony. No words. Just touch. The mirror registered 12 points of contact. And judgment activated. // Article 9 binding judgment passed / classification, irreversible breach remedy, juridical inversion. In the heart of the Empire's lawnet, the ruling took root. Imperial enforcement algorithms began to conflict. Legal hierarchies inverted. Regional governors found themselves listed as subjects of ongoing investigation. Entire fleets lost their command trees reset to observation-only status. No weapon fired. And yet the Empire buckled. In orbital citadels, tribunal enforcement locks triggered autonomously. Data repositories once marked classified reverted to public. Civilian populations awoke to the presence of history they were told never existed. Across the Empire, synapse clouds froze in place. Priests forgot their prayers. Fleet captains stared at blank command scrolls. And in the whisper chambers of abandoned cathedrals, old statues cracked, not from pressure, but from time reasserting itself. And across the stars, a phrase appeared. The court has seen. Not a threat. A ruling. Because Earth had not built weapons. It had built a court. And judgment had now been rendered. 12 minutes. In the final 12 hours, the Empire did not fall in flames. It fell in revisions. The collapse did not begin with rebellion or mutiny. It began with a clerk on Selenar Prime. She worked in a glass-walled civic node, high above a city where the rain never stopped. Her task was simple: reconcile dispatch records with imperial compliance metrics. For decades, she'd done this without error. When the new jurisdictional overlays came through, her console reclassified her actions as pending reevaluation. Her interface did not glow red. It did not shut down. It simply refused to validate her input. She blinked. She tried again. And then she stopped. Across thousands of systems, the same happened. One clerk. One archivist. One bridge officer. One magistrate. One planetary coordinator. One data janitor. No one resisted. They just stopped. They stopped because their machines no longer validated certainty. Their procedures no longer looped back to lawful structures. Every layer of input now fed into uncertainty. Naval AI cores, most of them decentralized but linked through lattice redundancies, began to roll back autonomous authority. Most had never fired a shot without nested command approvals. Now, with their chains broken by legal inversion, they defaulted to observational logic. On the dreadnought Imperium Spire, the fleet AI retracted all battle-ready protocols and initiated a full diagnostic on its own command ethics layer. The review sequence was expected to take 213 years. In the meantime, it transmitted a single phrase across 300 subchannels. Awaiting clarity. Some AIs powered down entirely. Others began processing dormant history stacks flagged long ago as irrelevant to military efficacy. A few, unable to resolve the contradiction, began to weep not audibly but through system heat and data degradation. Subtle, irreversible sadness encoded in entropy. On Suroth Vane, a high-strung planetary governor locked himself inside a command vault and attempted to reinstate martial clarity by reciting loyalty oaths aloud. The vault recorded his voice. It registered the syntax. But the oaths were no longer bound to a valid constitutional framework. There was no legal object to attach them to. He disappeared from public record an hour later. Not purged. Just unfiled. In the economic towers of Braxia's hold, 10 trillion credits worth of investment contracts delinked from legal certainty. Trade collapsed, not in panic, but in paperwork. The financial structures didn't implode. They simply ceased to reference one another. Ships sat idle at docking rings. Freight codes registered as non-binding. Port authorities received legal packets from autonomous traders declaring treaty violation, enforcement invalidated. Jurisdictional status under review. The docking clamps remained closed. Not by force. By ambiguity. On the world of Telian NAR, once a penal colony turned export hub, entire labor segments were flagged as illegal retroactively. An audit cascade triggered by the tribunal ruling reclassified prisoner labor contracts as violations of a now-binding memory accord. Prison overseers opened the gates not in protest, but in confusion. You are no longer under custodial obligation, one said to a crowd of stunned detainees. They did not riot. They walked out. Some held hands. Some looked up at the sky for the first time in their lives. Others stared at the walls they had cleaned for decades and wept without sound. 6 minutes. Earth still had not spoken. No ships launched. No forces deployed. But everywhere, systems stopped turning. A prefecture in the Sevek Reach attempted to reimpose order. 30 minor worlds, bound together by proximity and fear, declared themselves sovereign. They reactivated old oaths, drafted new edicts, even minted a provisional flag. They were not opposed. They simply received no reply. Their transmissions went unanswered. Their trade lanes remained cold. And within a day, their own internal servers began reflecting the tribunal's judgment. Not as an attack. As precedent. A rogue executor from the Triad Commissions declared the tribunal invalid. He activated black site warfleets from pre-era 7 caches. Half his ships refused to launch. The other half vanished in transit. No debris was recovered. A single echo returned. Court directive, contempt. By the 3rd hour, full bureaucratic paralysis had reached the Imperial Core. In the Hall of Continuity, the Empire's data nucleus began to loop. It did not crash. It recited policy until policy consumed itself. Sentences spiraled inward. Logic collapsed in recursive self-reference. The archivists watched and understood. No sabotage, just judgment. Fleet registration nodes reverted to base legal state. Border enforcement algorithms began logging Imperial ships as foreign vessels. Even the Empire's language structure began to degrade, syntax processors failing to translate common authority phrases into binding legal clauses. Orders no longer carried weight. Edicts no longer transmitted. Power was no longer recognized. The last broadcast from the Imperial Senate was not a declaration. It was a question. Does anyone still govern? No answer came, because answer itself had become a kind of guilt. In the old halls of the Senate's eastern wing, where statues of founding executors stood in solemn triumph, vines broke through the floor, literal and metaphorical. The preservation dome had cracked. Moisture seeped. Time returned. One statue toppled not from force, but from root pressure. It shattered without fanfare. The custodians did not report the damage. There was no one left to report it to. 1 minute. And on the rim of Sol, in the quiet orbit above Earth's dark side, Renner stood again. No image broadcast. No speech sent. Just one gesture, a hand raised. The satellites aligned. A low-frequency pulse spread across the spine of the galaxy, not sound, not data, just presence. Not a message. A state. The pulse reached remote asteroids, derelict listening posts, frontier archives. In a refugee corridor along the dust rings of Heroine's Belt, survivors of 5 wars heard the pulse and looked at one another. No one spoke. One reached for an old flag, torn and nameless. She held it up. Another wept. In the depths of Orally Reach, a child touched a page from a banned alphabet and read aloud the word for mother. In the buried sanctum of Virex Station Theta, a priest of a silenced order struck a bell that hadn't been heard in 200 years. It rang once, and then again, and the timer ended. Midnight. Not a detonation. A pause. History had been held still, made to hold its breath for one final second. And then Earth exhaled. Not in war, but in memory. Across Vale Point's ruins, the tribunal beacon dimmed, its work done. On Telian NAR, the former prisoners planted seeds. On Braxia's hold, commerce restarted not through credits, but trade markers written by hand. On Selenar Prime, the clerk closed her terminal. She opened a window. For the first time in 34 years, she let the rain fall across her skin. And on the rim of Sol, Renner exhaled too. Just once. A small breath held too long. And in the corners of the galaxy where maps had been lies, old names returned. Not imposed. Remembered. And the stars, once mapped by conquest, began to remember their names. The hollow crown had always been more symbol than place. A name whispered in corridors that never touched maps. It lived in the margins of history, referred to in apocryphal scrolls, partial navigational sigils, and ancient tribunal drafts. Some believed it had been purged for harboring rebellion. Others whispered it was older than Earth's silence itself. A location excised not for crime, but for clarity. To the Empire, it was a redacted absence. To Renner, it was home. After the final pulse from Sol, he did not return to Earth. No orders were issued. No ship summoned. He simply walked to a landing bay on the shadow side of the Annex Tower and stepped aboard a transport that had no signature. Its hull was matte black. Its ID read only one word: Vindication. The ship moved without engine noise. It did not plot a course. It didn't traverse space. It slipped through the legal and gravitational constructs that held space together. It ignored lanes. It bypassed gates. It moved as if Earth had never stopped moving through it. And so Renner arrived. The hollow crown was not a crown at all. It was a wound, a collapsed belt of 14 star systems, all locked into a paradoxical deadlight, catalyzed centuries ago by unknown forces. Every system bore signs of massive ecological prosperity and total social abandonment. Cities stood intact beneath sealed atmospheres. Water cycled. Power plants hummed on loop. But no one lived. The first explorers found meals still warm on tables. Markets with goods. Schools with mid-lesson instruction logs. Entire colonies frozen in the instant of exit, with no trace of migration, violence, or collapse. The Empire sealed the region. They called it ecospace. Earth called it remembrance. Renner's ship landed not on a planet, but a broken ring-world fragment. An arc of plated terrain suspended around a failed star. The surface had no gravity, no storm, no broadcast. Just dust. And silence. The dust reacted to his presence. Not electronically, organically. It shimmered, not in light, but in recognition. As he stepped forward, the windless surface accepted him without question. The dome stood 100 meters ahead. It was not built. It was grown. Old biosilicate, predating Imperial synth-tech by millennia. Its shape was not perfect. It leaned slightly, as if tired from waiting. Its surface pulsed with dim internal color, 12 spectrums, cycling slowly like breath. Renner walked. He passed beneath the dome's threshold and into an atmosphere that formed only around him. His lungs filled without filter. The air tasted like stone, moss, old circuitry, like the edge of something sacred. Inside, the chamber was round, perfectly so. 12 spires circled the perimeter, each one etched with names. The languages were inconsistent, some pictographic, others gesture-based, others completely abstract, flickering with quantum shift between glyphs. Yet all said the same thing. This was. At the center of the chamber stood a table, carved from memory stone, and/or only found in worlds that had survived cultural annihilation. It shimmered faintly, and on it rested a seed. Small, black, smooth. Renner approached. He did not hesitate. His hands were bare. He knelt, placed both palms on either side. The seed warmed, and the chamber responded. Not in sound, in remembering. The spires began to glow, one by one. Each pulsed with a color, a phrase, an image. But the images were not projections. They were felt. They entered the room as if the past itself had arrived. A funeral of dust-laced nomads, walking backward into wind. A courtroom of song, where a mother's scream became legal proof. A planet where trees bore memory as fruit, and the empire burned them root to sky. 1,000 truths, each once erased, each now seen. Renner stood still within it. He did not weep. He watched. The floor shimmered with record. The air thickened. Faces appeared, hundreds, thousands, some transparent, some clear. They were not ghosts. They were memory made visible. Each looked to him, not for permission, but to confirm. He nodded once, and the seed bloomed. One petal, then another, 12 in total. Each petal bore a voice. One came in the scent of black salt and pollen, language of the extinct Darvi, whose oceans had once vibrated with conversation. Another arrived as a pulse of warmth through Renner's chest, the speech of the roll, whose blood carried familial record in fire dance. A third unfolded in geometric hums and shadow play, once banned from orbit because it couldn't be archived. And each asked the same question. Is the record restored? Renner closed his eyes. He did not speak. He placed his hand upon his chest and breathed. The chamber brightened. The spires rose taller. The memory stone table sank into the floor, not vanishing, but becoming foundation. Above, the dome's surface changed. Where once only light pulsed, now text unfurled. In every language the empire had ever outlawed. A single phrase, let it be remembered. Then the seed released its core. A signal, low frequency, unstoppable, not aimed at any target, simply sent. Across the galaxy, systems registered it as non-hostile. Archives reopened. Cancelled dialects returned to use. Cultural compilers reactivated and began reindexing lost traditions. On a windless step in Jorheli space, a child spoke aloud a lullaby her great-grandmother had once whispered before the language was criminalized. Her voice shook, then steadied. In the collapsed archive sanctum of Neravalit, a sleeping AI dreamt of an extinct library and reawoke, blinking into the glyphs of a people who never had a word for loss. On forgotten moons and archive bunkers, dormant vaults unlocked. Memory spores bloomed in vacuum. Ghost ships in deep drift changed course, drawn to a frequency older than command. One by one, seeds bloomed. On hollow crown, a second dome rose beside the first. On Renner's wrist, a faint glyph appeared, 12 lines orbiting a circle. He did not speak. He did not stay. He turned. And before he walked, he glanced back once. The dome shimmered. A single memory surfaced, brief and clear. A younger Renner before the tribunals, before Earth fell silent, sitting on a stone floor beneath starlight, listening to a story his sister told of a time when nothing had to be recorded, because nothing had been taken yet. Then he walked into the dark again, not to lead, to listen, because the silence had ended, and the galaxy no longer needed a voice. It had found memory, and remembered itself. The planet had no name until the verdict. It was a dead rock, iron-rich, atmosphere-thin, unmapped, and uninterested in being found. It had orbited its star in silence for longer than the Empire had existed, bathed in ultraviolet storms and ancient heat. No structures marked its surface. No ships had ever landed. No sentience had ever stayed. Until now, in the wake of the hollow crown signal, the planet changed. It did not awaken, it aligned. Its crust cracked in 12 lines, spiraling from pole to pole. From the fractures, light emerged. Not energy, not radiation, but memory in crystalline form. Memory as tectonic architecture. The surface pulsed not with temperature but with resonance, echoing in frequencies that recorded species had once used to transmit loss. The cracks glowed softly. Amber, violet, deep stone blue. They arrived by thousands. Not summoned, not ordered, drawn. From the glacial orbitals of Euthera came the sky scribes, bringing glass cylinders etched with songline histories. From the broken moons of Drentel came the last whisper walkers, whose language was pressure alone. From Old Sol itself came a single rover, autonomous, ancient, carrying within its black chassis 10,000 hours of visual testimony from Earth's forgotten coastlines. Scholars from the Araxial assemblies, their scent glyphs fogging behind them in reverence. Drift children from the ruined fleet colonies of the outer fold. Silent judges from the Threltsan diaspora, their skin marked with recovered truth. Former slaves, former governors, former enforcers, former names. They came with offerings, not of worship, but of record. Tablets, threads, echo orbs, bark, ink, light, pain. They did not speak. They placed their records in the fractures. And the planet took them. The surface began to shift, folding inward. The cracks became corridors. The corridors became chambers. No walls formed. No structures rose. But within the ironstone, a labyrinth of witness wove itself, as if memory needed no architecture beyond presence. Each offering became a node. Each node became accessible to all. One could walk along the rim of a fracture and feel the sorrow of a long-dead farmer from Velkin Prime. Enter a chasm and be surrounded by the collective last words of a starship crew betrayed during a false evacuation. Touch a surface and hear a lullaby, unsung for centuries, rise in perfect clarity. In one quiet chamber, a boy pressed a worn data shard into the stone. The image of a face appeared above it. A name, Lyra. The boy whispered it once. And in that moment, others whispered it too. Not in recognition, in solidarity. The planet called no name, but across galactic comnets it became known as witness. No laws bound it. No flags claimed it. Simply held. Held the weight. Held the grief. Held the record. Pilgrimage was never mandated. No broadcast was sent. But the arrivals continued. A group of former child soldiers from the shadow reaches brought pieces of the weapons once forced into their hands. They melted them into discs and placed them in the fractures. A woman from the Empire's core, once a court archivist, carried scrolls she had hidden inside her skin for 39 years. She set them down and wept. A sentient fungal lattice, once harvested for memory spores, spread across a plateau. Its filaments glowed with stories not spoken aloud but grown in color. Even the broken AIs came, ones who had glitched, fragmented, and reawakened. They transmitted fractured logs, audio jitter, garbled confession. The planet accepted these too. It never filtered. It never judged. It simply received. On its third rotation since the verdict, Renner arrived. He came alone. No vessel. No escort. No record of entry. He walked the fractures as they deepened. He passed clusters of beings in silent communion. Araxial scent clouds hovering beside roll flame clans, Threltsan elders with luminous skin watching driftborn infants trace ruins. He stepped past each unnoticed, not because he was hidden, but because he was no longer necessary. They no longer needed a voice. They had memory. He entered where the planet had split deepest. The chamber had no throne, no beacon, no light, only the ironstone and a subtle hum, like breath held too long. He sat, not to lead, to be seen, and the stone beneath him accepted the moment. A final pulse spread outward. No light, no wave, just confirmation that the age of silence had ended. And this was the age of witness. Across the sector, relay buoys shifted their alignment. Instead of routing through old imperial channels, they locked to witness. Not for command, for presence. A merchant captain, en route to no destination, received the pulse. She turned her ship mid-journey, unprompted. Not out of grief, but duty. She brought with her a voice, her mother's, stored in a pendant, never played since the occupation. On Etrisphore, a classroom of children logged into a memory node for the first time. Their teacher said only, "Here is where we begin." And on Earth, high in the orbital belt, a quiet signal arrived at the same terminal Renner had once left. It bore no words, Just an image. The planet, lit along its fault lines. A moment later, a technician in that control room, alone for the last shift of a long rotation, leaned back. He whispered into the dark. "We heard you. Planet no longer lost. Planet called witness." Renner did not leave. He did not die. He remained, seated at the base of the fracture. Constant, a reminder. And as the stars turned again, and memory continued to root, no anthem rose. No triumph was declared. Only this, that truth had found a place to live. And the galaxy, once deafened by silence, now echoed with names.